Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of the Intentional Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Campion, and I am psyched to have with me today Jonathan Goodman. If you don't know Jonathan, he is a successful entrepreneur, author, and host of the popular podcast, The Obvious Choice. That's a top podcast for coaches, entrepreneurs, and small business owners. John's been featured in a number of business and fitness publications, including Men's Health, Forbes, Entrepreneur, and many more. And in fact, over 200,000 coaches and small business owners in more than 120 countries, that's a lot, have purchased business development materials from him. He's sort of a coach of coaches, if you will. Now, the basis for the conversation that follows is his new book titled The Obvious Choice: Timeless Lessons on Success, Profit, and Finding Your Way. I was fortunate enough to receive an advance copy of the book, and it's packed with a ton of great advice on starting and running businesses, including one of his core ideas that you don't need to, quote unquote, win the internet in order to win at business. That one has really resonated with me. Now, we took a unique approach to this conversation, so I had asked John in advance if he'd be willing to analyze my own approach to intentional wisdom as a business, and in particular, a new coaching service that I'm just beginning to roll out and get feedback on. And fortunately, he was game. So we got into it, and I learned a ton. So listen, I took away a ton of value from the conversation. And if you're someone who runs a business, has a side hustle, maybe even just has aspirations of creating either one, I think you'll get a lot of value out of this too. Before we get into it, just a reminder that I recap all of these conversations in my newsletter, Intentional Wisdom. So head over to gregcampion.substack.com to subscribe. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Jonathan Goodman. All right, Jonathan Goodman, welcome to the podcast.
What's up, man? Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. I'm psyched to have you on the show here. And we were just talking about, so you are in balmy Mexico, spending the winter, I think, with your family. So
we had a couple drops of rain yesterday, unseasonable. I didn't expect it. Nobody knew what to do.
Yeah, nice. All right. Well, as we're freezing up here in the States and Canada, then so you're Canadian though, so you spend most of the year up in Toronto. Is that right?
My home is Toronto.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where our house is. That's where my home is. I'm born and raised there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I spend every winter abroad. And so this is winter number 13 in a row.
That's amazing.
Where I've basically escaped the coldest months. Like I've been away a minimum of 4 months every year for the last 13 years. Yeah.
Okay. Congratulations on having your life figured out enough to do that. That is cool.
You can do it too.
Yeah. So I was looking back, I couldn't remember exactly how you and I connected, but it was through our mutual friend, John Finkel on Twitter.
Is that how it was? Okay.
Yes. So he had like retweeted something about your upcoming book launch.
Yeah.
And I was like, that sounds super cool. And I was like, I got to dive into Jonathan's stuff. And you were like, well, I'll give you a money back guarantee on the book. And I was like, all right, man, you sold me. Let's go. I'm going to dive in here. And I'm happy that I did. So I just spent the last few weeks reading through your book. So it's called The Obvious Choice.
Yes, sir.
And obviously we want to talk a lot about that in this conversation.
I got the first ever hard copy final version sent to me in Mexico. Because what you've got is an early reader version. You've got the paperback. There will never be more of those printed. But yeah, no, this is fun. So this arrived just the other day. While I had actually 2 videographers in town here for 3 days, we recorded we recorded like 13 hours of content straight. And the last day these books arrived. And so we were able to actually film with them, which was fantastic. Great time.
So I want to ask you why you wrote this book, because you're already a very successful guy. So you've built 2 multi-million-dollar businesses. You've already written 11 books. I saw that number.
I counted.
Yeah.
I sent this to a team member. I'm like, I don't know if we'll ever use this with content, but if anybody asks, I've actually built 7 different $100,000 plus income streams.
Wow. Awesome.
From memberships to events to software to courses to self-publishing, coaching, kind of every which way.
Wow. All right. So I'm feeling like a total slouch. I self-published a couple of books, but have built nowhere near as many income streams. So I'm all about learning from you, man. This is that's what we're going to do in this conversation.
Let's do it.
But tell me, like, what was the impetus? So you've done all this stuff in your career. You're in a really good spot. You're wintering in Mexico. Things are good, man. So like, why torture yourself with another writing a whole nother book?
I love writing books. I mean, my career, the best that I can define what I do for a living is authorship. Yeah. It always has been. I've always believed that in order to write interesting books, you've got to do interesting shit in the world. I think that's missing, particularly from a lot of nonfiction. The person just like hasn't done enough. They haven't gotten kicked in the teeth enough. They haven't explored enough. Or maybe they have enough to write one book, but then they try to write the second, and their entire lifetime of experience kind of led to their first, and then they try to do the second really, really fast, right? So my career really is authorship. And then I build the businesses as a way to both support it, but more than anything else, just give me the fodder for the books. Like, it's this masochistic habit that I don't understand, which is that I find writing, particularly writing books, tremendously difficult. It beats me down in every way of sense of the word. But there's nothing else that gives me that same combination of struggle and conflict, yet creative fulfillment, where, I mean, I write first thing in the morning before anybody else wakes up. Like, I was up at 5:30 in the morning editing a chapter for the next book. And so my wife gets up a little bit later. She's a night person. I'm a morning person, the yin and the yang. It works out well. But she woke up like a few hours later. She's like, how'd it go? I'm like, oh, shit. Like basically every morning, I'm like, it was terrible. But then every once in a while, it's not. And there's nothing else that I do, Greg, where I struggle with it the way that I do, and then I'm excited and energized to wake up the next morning to do it again. And I think once you discover that, once anybody discovers whatever that thing is for them, they should very much align everything else in their life to support and prioritize that thing. And so the businesses that I run are not optimized to make as much money as they possibly could. I have a core operator in place for all of them. That person gets way too big of a chunk of the pie than they probably should, realistically. And I pay my people extraordinarily well, with incentive structures primarily, like way above, what they would earn elsewhere. But the reality of it is that gives me the freedom to write while having the experience. So you asked where the book came from. One of my businesses is a mentorship, for basically high-end fitness coaches. Call it the top 1% of the top 1% of fitness coaches, to help them just grow their online training business. A lot of them feel like they need to become famous on the internet or become online entertainers in order to build these businesses, whereas the reality of it is actually many of our most successful students either don't have an online following or have like 1,500 followers, because what most people are doing when they're trying to build these big followings online actually is counterintuitive and gets in the way of what they really should be doing, which is talking to more humans, which is going more direct to the source, and building these more relationships, becoming more of, the obvious choice. And so what was happening was that, we have 100, 200, 300 inbound DM inquiries every day, mostly on Instagram, about this type of thing, just because I've been in the industry for a long time and written books in it and stuff. And we have inquiries for our services, right? And overwhelmingly, my team was just like, oh, we have a minimum to work with us. The minimum is you have to be making a minimum of $1,000 a month. And if you're not, we'll try to provide you with resources that are free or, somewhere else to get to that point. And like nobody was getting there. And it was crazy to me. I mean, $1,000 a month for somebody who defines themselves as a person who works in an industry is really not that much money. I mean, these are people who have beautifully branded Instagram accounts. They're being consistent with content, just as one example. And then you talk to them and you're like, how many clients do you have? Like, 3, like kind of 2. I'm making like $75 a month. It's like, yo, how are you feeding your family? And so that was the impetus that led to the book. I was like, we just got to talk about this a bit more, man. Not that there's anything wrong with trying to be famous on the internet, but it's clearly not the most direct path to build the business that most people want. If your goal is to be an influencer or entertainer, 100%, like try to get followers, try to get likes, try to get engagement. That's one game that you play, but the rules of engagement, the time horizons, the odds of success, the reward mechanisms are fundamentally different in that game as they are in the game of like, how do I build a business, man? How do I get some customers, man? And so that's what led to it, and then kind of grew from there.
So I think the timing of this book is actually really good, because I think like, I speak for myself too, is like you had this group of people who went through COVID, were all home for a couple of years. They got involved in the content creation game. They started, they maybe took some like audience building classes, or they did this and that, right? And so they started to get that. They started to get that, and they started to see people having some success, right? Some people building really big followings on Twitter and in other places.
Right. I would ask you what you mean by success, and whether whether those people are actually successful based off of your definition of success.
Yep. Yeah.
But you're right.
Yes. That's a good question. And I would say like, yes. So a very surface level, optically, these people are getting attention, let's say.
Yes.
But I think the big aha and the reason why, I think the big aha moment in your book here and what the message you're putting out is like, this does not translate to a business. And you have a lot of examples throughout the book where you're like, I can't remember exactly which part of the book it was, but there was one part where you were talking about personal trainers, and there was somebody who was like, there was all these trainers like in the locker room, like working on their content strategies.
Yeah.
And then there was a whole gym full of people. You're like,
yeah,
those are your customers. Just walk out into the gym and like have actual conversations with real people.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That was a sales consult that I was brought in to do. Yeah. At this gym, it was like 100,000 square foot gym. They had 20,000 paying members. So this gym already had 20,000 customers, and there were 20 trainers on staff. And like, for context, I mean, this book is not just about personal training, but there are some examples from there, and there's a lot of examples from other stuff. But for context, like a personal trainer only needs 20 to 25 customers in order to be full. Like a trainer will work 30 to 40 hours on the floor, which is generally even 15 to 20 customers. Call it 20 to 25. So you really only need 20 to 25 customers, right? It's not a lot of bodies. It's not a lot of humans. And yet these 20 trainers could not fill their schedules in a gym with 20,000 members. And when I went there, and when I went for the tour of the gym with the manager before I gave this like consult to like help their sales team and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. I was like, where is everybody? Because they all materialized in this meeting room, which was like a group exercise class, like classroom, like studio. They all materialized there right after this walk. And it turned out they were in their break room. Many of them were creating content. Mm. And yeah, I mean, I just said to them, I was like, what do you think is more valuable for you right now? 5,000 people on the internet who tangentially know who you are, who think you kind of might know something about fitness, or 50 wealthy and well-connected people who are literally in this building right now. All you got to do is open that door.
Yes.
But they weren't doing it.
So, all right. So you mentioned that the book is not all about personal training, and that is exciting for me because I'm not a personal trainer, but I want to benefit from your expertise and all the work that you've done here. So, so I sent you a DM
to learn from.
Yeah, I sent you a DM a couple of days ago, and I was like, "Hey, what do you think about approaching this conversation in a way where like we can analyze my business a little bit?" A purely selfish move by me, but fortunately, you were game for it and up for it, and so I want to dive in, and I want to. I thought maybe I would start by just giving you like a little bit of background by what I've got going on, some of the like assets, so to speak, and experiences that I have that I think could be leveraged. And then I'd like to like look at this through some of the different lenses and frameworks you talk about in the obvious choice.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Exciting.
Kind of do like a real-time example. Okay, cool. So interrupt me, but let me just talk you through this real quick. So,
yep. I'm going to take some notes.
Okay, cool. So this podcast and the content I do for Intentional Wisdom is kind of like a side gig for me, right? So my main thing is I work in the finance industry, and so I work for a big asset management firm. So I'm actually coming up on year 25 working basically on Wall Street. I used to work in New York City, and now I'm back in my 20s. Now I'm in North Carolina, but same industry. Started in sales. Now I'm in marketing. I actually host another podcast for a big asset manager where I talk all about financial markets and what's going on, the ins and outs of stocks and bonds and all that kind of stuff. So, finance, content creation, and I would say one thing that I think could be leveraged here is that I'm super comfortable interacting with CEOs, CFOs, like the most senior executives you have on Wall Street, like interacting with them on their level, like basically being able to talk their language, so to speak.
And do you have access to them? That's another question.
That's a good question. We can talk about that.
Okay.
I have access to them in different ways in terms of like LinkedIn networks, personal networks, some of that stuff. So let's come back to that one.
Yeah, because that could be there could be something interesting there. People whose titles are really meaningful, but whose names are not out there.
Mm-hmm.
I always think about what you can give to somebody else who is otherwise inaccessible as a way to get in. And for a lot of wealthy people who are conventionally successful, they see others in their industry getting a lot of the prestige and the accolades, and they feel like they deserve it. And so what can you give them? You can give them perceived status, for example, to their buddies. So that's interesting. Okay. And then, of course, you benefit because you've got like the CEO of this asset management firm that's really meaningful that like has never done a long form interview before.
So anyways, that's basically the day job. I manage teams there. I mentor young people in the firm. Stuff like that, but that's the day job. So in one sense, the good news is I don't have to do anything else besides that. Like I have a good quality career there, have a lot of independence and autonomy to work on projects I want to work on and all that kind of stuff. So built up a lot of goodwill over the years, so that all feels good, and I feel like it's not a terrible starting point in terms of I'm not like desperate to that I need to like make money. So that I think that actually on the side. So I think that could actually come in handy. But all that said, I've always been a kind of a tinkerer on the side, kind of flirting with entrepreneurship during this whole 25-year career. So I've self-published a couple of books. One of them was called CFA Confidential, which is basically about my own personal experience taking these absolutely murderous financial exams and failing a bunch of them along the way, but ultimately passing.
Okay.
And then I wrote another book called Say Good Morning Like a Human. And that is a book basically about the top 50 mistakes I've made navigating the corporate world throughout my career. And so that one was kind of like tongue in cheek. Like I did like little drawings and stuff. Like it's basically meant to be funny. It's like little like 2 and 3 page chapters, but it's actually like something that like if you're like a 22-year-old kid out of school, like I want to hand you this and be like, don't do all this dumb stuff that I did. Like like handling tough conversations in person as opposed to like getting an email battle, like all that kind of stuff that you just learn over time.
Right.
And then lastly, with this business, the Intentional Wisdom. So this I started up in COVID, and this has basically been a real focus on self-improvement. Okay. And so I have a newsletter that I've been writing for a few years. I have this podcast I've been recording for a few years. It's kind of been probably a little bit too broad in terms of a topic area. So it hasn't been super dialed in or niche. So I think that's one thought, but I do have a very strong passion for all things self-improvement. It's been a little bit more dialed into that on the health and wellness side over the last like year or so. So I'm like, I'm like doing deep dives on like zone 2 training and like learning everything I can possibly learn on zone 2 training, and like then like writing a primer for that for my newsletter subscribers. I'm like diving into like, you know, like living like alcohol free is like a big thing for me. So like I'm doing, you know, creating content on that. I'm doing a self-experimentation, like, you know, getting my body fat percentage and VO2 max measured to like start the year, and then trying all these different things, and then like reporting on how I'm doing.
You and I are so different that way. It's so fascinating when I meet and talk to people like you, because I'm so opposite of the, call it the quantified self movement.
Okay.
Like I don't want to measure anything.
Yep.
I mean, I wear a Casio watch. Right?
Dude, I am the opposite. I got the Whoop and the Apple Watch.
It's so interesting. Well, but that's
I'm even wearing a CGM right now, to be honest.
Somebody who does one thing like that does everything like that. I mean, right. That's in the book. People who buy lots. People who do one thing do a lot of things like that thing.
Yep.
And so, you know, you have to keep that in mind when you're looking for customers too. But it's so fascinating to me, because I'm the type of guy where we had one of those Amazon smart speakers in our house.
Yeah.
And I just picked it up one day, just took it straight out to the trash.
Right.
I'm like, I just don't want this in my house.
Yeah.
So
I can strangely, I can understand that, but I'm so far at the end of the other spectrum right now. But okay. So lastly, just to kind of land the ship here and give you something to go on. So, it's my content has not been totally like health and fitness though. Like I do stuff on how to get better at golf, and I'll dive in on that, and then like talk to an author, and we'll go through that. You know, I'll do like an explainer on atomic habits. I'm a parent of 3 kids, so I interview like a middle school counselor. We talk about like, you know, all of the challenges of that age and all this kind of stuff. So anyways, like I said, not targeted, which I think has actually made it probably a little challenging on the monetization side.
You need a way in, right? You need a way in. You talked about John Finkel, right? Our mutual friend, and he runs a newsletter called Books and Biceps. Mm-hmm. You know, it's so obviously for you. Yep. If you're a meathead who likes to read, and so obviously not if you're not. You know, that was the first newsletter purely based off of the name I subscribed. Yeah. I didn't even look what it was. I was like, oh, for the first time ever, somebody has nailed me. Yeah,
you're like, you don't, these two things don't like obviously go together. And so when somebody is doing something that puts them together, then you're like, okay, that's a niche.
But what does John talk about? I mean, he talks about swimming. He's obsessed with like anything to do with oceans. So a lot of the books are on treasure divers or whales or whatever, things that he's interested in. But there has to be a way in.
Yes.
That immediately hooks you. And then from there you have permission. From there you have permission.
Now let me tell you this one more thing. So I'm out to dinner with friends a few months ago. And this is like, you know, a bunch of guys in their 40s, all successful in their own right. Some of them run their own companies. Some of them are like, you know, very senior executives at different companies and stuff like that. So one of my buddies, he's probably like a top 2 or 3 exec at a big publicly traded company. Okay. He's like, dude, I know what you should do. He's like, you should be like the life coach for CEOs. And he's like, these guys are all super busy and they feel guilty about they're not paying enough attention to their health. They're not managing, they're missing time with their families. They feel like they're dropping balls left and right. And this was kind of an interesting observation. I don't know if this is true or not, but he was like, these guys are, he's like, it's lonely at the top. He's like, these guys are actually lonely, and their job is so much of their life that they haven't really had time to like cultivate true friendships. So he's like, this is going to sound a little weird. He's like, but you should be like, almost like they're like paid friend in some ways, or like a life coach, like somebody who they know is doing all the stuff that they don't have time to do, like researching the zone 2 or the diets, or like diving in deep and figuring out what's the answer. Should you give a 13-year-old a phone or not give him a phone? You know, all this kind of stuff. So he's like, he raised that idea to me, and I was like, that could be interesting.
There's something there.
Yeah.
There's something there.
I could see myself doing, like, even if I have like 1 or 2 clients, I could see myself like almost, I could see myself like really enjoying that, but also kind of along the lines of your like whales and minnows strategy, which it might be good for you to talk about, like continuing to produce content over here that's more broadly available, and then maybe going super deep with 1 or 2 like clients.
Okay, let me jump on this. I think there might be something there. There's a book that I've spoken to my publisher and agent about a few times, and it's really a deep dive on how to scale coaching businesses. I mean, I think if there's, in terms of tactical business stuff that I know just about as good as anybody in the world, it's how to scale coaching businesses big, and not be the operator in them. Like, I own multiple coaching businesses that do a couple $1 million of profit each year, and I've never coached a minute inside any of them. So like, I could build coaching businesses and scale them, right? So it was going to be a book on that, but the pitch to the publisher is like, actually, here's all of the things going on in the world right now that lead me to believe that coaching is going to be the business model of the future. You've got automation and artificial intelligence coming down the pipeline. You've got this wealth gap that is so wide already, that is going to continue to widen to such extreme levels where the rich are going to be getting so rich. They're already so rich. They're going to just be getting so rich. And then it's not even that there's going to be, like, there's basically not going to be a middle class. It's already kind of being eliminated. I mean, the middle class was developed by the United States to serve the soldiers coming back from wartime. And it's basically been eliminated, slowly since then, but faster and faster and faster. So you basically have the rich who have just about everything, and then you're not even going to have the poor. You're just going to have the unemployed. And so all of these people now who don't call it, own the robots, own the machines, are going to be looking for something to do. There's going to be no jobs that are... I mean, there's just going to be no jobs for a large amount of people. And so, but all of these people like you are obsessive about something in a way that, this rich CEO buddy, I'm going to call him Steve for no reason, this rich CEO buddy of yours, Steve, just doesn't have time for decisions that maybe don't have clear and obvious answers, like, should I give my 13-year-old daughter a cell phone, to decisions where maybe there is a more obvious answer, but it's just kind of hard and time, and it's not money that's getting in the way. It's like, hey, I need to figure out how to get my health in check. I need to find a good coach who I trust. I don't care how much I'm going to pay them, but they need to tell me what to do, and they need to order meals to my house and my office, right? Or, like in the fitness industry, I know everybody's personal trainer. So I know what goes on behind the scenes. For example, Gary Vaynerchuk's, all of his personal trainers I've been friends with over the years, they will have Gary's schedule. They will know what restaurant he goes to. They will call the restaurant in advance to get dietary and nutritional information for all of the meals. And they will send Gary a text message and say, order this. And Gary will show up at the restaurant and know exactly what to order based off of his meal plan, right? That's one of the services that this coach was providing, in addition to the workouts, in addition to, of course, everything else. And so I talk about this in the book with Loai, who's my urban vegetable gardening coach.
Oh, yes.
And, Loai was like middle management in this big multinational, like well-educated engineering degree. And he just loves urban vegetable gardening. He doesn't really, maybe his job still exists, maybe it doesn't, I don't really know. He's left it, but he certainly didn't love it. But there's people like me who, fortunate, have found themselves in a position where they have enough, and I just don't have enough time to research different types of soil or do an assessment of the sunlight over the course of the year and how it's going to affect and what grows in Toronto and what is perennials and what do I plant every single, like, ain't nobody got time for this shit. But I want to grow veggies at my house. So I call Loy, and he comes to my house and does a soil assessment and looks at the sun and knows how it's going to move. And he talks to me about what kinds of things my family likes to eat. For example, we like a lot of Chinese veg and stuff like that. And then what he'll do is he'll look at the weather reports. He'll know when are the best times to plant different things. And he will go to Islington nurseries and he will pick up all of the stuff that looks good. That's the right stuff to plant based off of all of those factors. And he will show up at my house and we will plant together. That's the business model of the future for a lot of these things. And so for you, you know, I call it the guy. I call this business model the guy. Like literally your business, Greg, is I'm the guy. Everybody wants a guy for that. I'm the guy for that. If it's not something that I obsess over, even if I don't know, I know where to find.
Right.
That's
like
my job.
Important to me. Like this stuff's all important to somebody, but they, to your point, they don't obsess over it. It's almost like these guys are all. It's all of us to some degree are outsourcing things. Some things we don't want to do. Right. So I pay somebody to mow my lawn once a week. Could I mow my lawn once a week? Yes. Should I? I've made the decision not to because I want to use that time for something else, like spend that time with my family or whatever.
And
so
see,
it's almost
I
like
love
the
mowing
next
my lawn.
iteration. Okay, so we're
And
total
I love
opposites
mowing my lawn.
apparently. Yeah.
And I paid somebody to mow my lawn.
Yep.
We've got a corner house. We've got a huge lot. Like it takes me like 3 hours to mow my lawn. I love mowing my lawn. I don't always enjoy mowing my lawn, but I love the fact that I mow my lawn. I love, after I've mowed my lawn, going out after dinner, standing back on my street and smelling the smell of the fresh grass clippings and appreciating how much I was able to beautify and take care of my home. Right. I love that feeling. And so, you know, I did the business owner thing for a couple years and I hired somebody else because my time was worth more. And, you know, but to your point, there's a lot of stuff I don't do that others do. You know, what it sounds like to me, Greg, based off of what you were saying, like you just love obsessing over intellectual shit that is so nuanced and granular and going down these insanely deep rabbit holes. I mean, you talked about zone 2 training. Zone 2 training is like going for a light jog. Like to me, you know, I've worked in the fitness industry since 2005, full time. Like I look at something like that and I'm just like, there's not really much more that you need to know. Like, you know, do 20 or 30 minutes, ideally 2 or 3 times a week where you're breathing a little bit harder, but can still maintain a conversation. There's your zone 2 training. Like you're done. Right. Whereas you were obsessed over optimizing this, which I think is wonderful. And there's a lot of value to that. And so, you know, this idea of I'm your guy.
Yep.
You know, if you need anything, even if you want, like I will produce a report for you and your wife to go over talking about the pros and cons of giving a 13-year-old girl a cell phone. And I will book you a paid consult with the researcher who did the report to discuss it afterwards.
Yes. The researcher was named ChatGPT. I actually asked ChatGPT this question and got a halfway decent answer. So,
sure.
Now let me, okay. So if I think about,
I think it's brilliant.
If I think about if I try to poke holes in this idea,
you're going to order all that, all those watches and rings and stuff.
I could do that.
You're going to order that to the person's house and you're going to tell them to put it on. And then you're going to look at their reports and you're going to be like, hey, idiot, what did you eat before bedtime? and they're going to say, I ate this. And you're going to say, okay, I get that you want to eat something at night. Like, how about you have that?
Now I could say, like, if I wanted like poke holes in my own thing, I could say, okay, I don't have any coaching experience.
Sure.
And I would, if I did something like this, like I would honestly want to position myself as at the sort of quite top end. Like I know, I actually had a conversation with a guy. I had a really very successful entrepreneur on this podcast, and he like swears by his executive coach. And I had a conversation with the executive coach, and he was like super impressive, and I love like the life this guy's living. And we chatted briefly about like his rates, and I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like it was, you know, I feel like I have a pretty good career, and I was like, I would not. He prices himself very high, but he works with, you know, the founder of Instagram and, you know, stuff like that. Like that's the level he's operating at.
But like you don't, I mean, even this buddy you were talking about.
Yeah.
Does it really, I mean, is money a factor for him at all anymore? You know, whether you charge yourself out at, call it $2,000 a month or $15,000 a month, you know, like, would he even think about that?
So there was something in your book that that struck me when you said, I think it might have been when we were talking about how you decided to like hire a financial advisor, and you're like, I didn't go through and like, you know, check what school he went to and check all his like, it was trust, right? And it was like you talk about trust transcends expertise, I think was a quote I wrote down. And you talk about, you know, you explain that, because I think that's a pretty good way to look at it, like how people make decisions around who to work with in these types of scenarios.
So put a pin in that idea of how people make decisions, because I think that could be something to talk about with you, with where you're getting at, because I think you're fascinating, Greg. I really do. I think you're fascinating. I think you think so different than I do, and I'm all for it. And I think it's great and to explore it. Yes, trust transcends expertise. Over 90% of all purchases are still mostly offline, word of mouth driven. We don't see it though. And so we put too much emphasis on the things that we do see, that we can measure. You know, look around you. I mean, Greg, you look around you, and anybody listening to this, I mean, look around you, look at all the things you're wearing that are around you. Like I've got, you know, lights here, I've got my watch, I've got my microphone, I've got my phone, I've got a notebook. Look around you at every single thing that's in your space. Do you even know if any one of these companies has a social media account? Like, do you have you ever listened to some influencer say, here's the top 3 things you need to know when buying a microphone? If you did, do you remember who that is? And did you spend a cent on that person making that video? The answer is almost inevitably no. And even when it comes down to coaches or hiring service professionals for what we do you even know if they have a social media account? Maybe you do. In a very, very rare case, if you're honest with yourself, it might be like 1 in 20. But even if you do, did they initially attract you as a result of their content? Or did something else attract you, or you were introduced to them some other way? Usually somebody who you trust or somebody who you cross paths with let you know about them. And then maybe their content, podcast, YouTube, social media, whatever, newsletter, maybe that perhaps nurtured you.
Yes.
Or retained you as a customer. I look at all content on the internet as, number one, a way to learn. It's just you teach to learn. And so it's a phenomenal way to learn is to create content. I look at it, number 2, as a nurturance agent. And so, you know, you don't create content as a way to generate leads for your business. You perhaps use content as a way to convert leads or nurture leads or retain leads that are generated elsewhere. I think you have to think of it that way. And as a result, you have to measure it then based off of metrics that make sense for your business, not superficial metrics and engagement metrics. that, call it Instagram wants you to know, or Spotify wants you to know in terms of downloads. If you were to run, for example, a podcast where you are having deep conversations with the CEOs of wealth management firms, what would be more valuable to you from a listener base? 50 other wealthy and well-connected CEOs of wealth management firms? Or 15,000 people who are kind of interested in, I don't know, how to invest their money?
Yeah, definitely the former. Yeah.
It's 100% the first,
yeah.
But you're not going to make a top 100 podcast list. You're not going to be. And so this is why I say in the book, in a few different ways, what's good for the ego is bad for the wallet. There's a lot of people who are rich with likes and poor with dollars. And so you have to think about these things. I mean, trust comes down to what I illustrate as a triangle. There's specificity, familiarity, and community. Right? How specific is this thing to you? We talked about that with John Finkel, like books and biceps. Like I immediately trusted this guy because he was able to cut through the noise and make it so comically specific to me. But kind of by definition, what he was doing is scary because it's not right for probably 99.9% of people that might land on that page, which is fine because you really don't need that many customers. And then once you get big, you can begin to expand out, right? This is how you start, not necessarily how you scale. And then it's familiarity, people you cross paths with all the time. Something that your neighbor is buying, or you don't even know if your neighbor is buying it. If there's a truck or a work van, in front of your neighbor's house.
I love this part of your book.
The meat van guy.
Dude, we have the meat guy. So the meat guy showed up at my house like 2 months ago in my driveway. And all I hear about is like, I just hear my son coming in the store like, Mom just spent a couple $100 with some guy who was selling meat and stopped by the driveway. I'm like, what? And he was exactly your strategy. Like he's like, you probably seen my van around. I know this family up the street really well. They really love the lobster I have, I'm like, oh, this guy's got a business right here.
And so we trust that guy because we believe that our neighbors are buying from him, even if we don't know our neighbors, even if we don't know whether or not our neighbors are actually buying from him. We still trust him more than anything you are ever going to see online.
Which is ironic because I'm like, do we really know where this meat came from? Like if you get in the grocery store, you kind of know where it comes from.
Maybe you shouldn't trust a dude who shows up with a van on your street selling meat, But we do. And so familiarity, right? How often do you see something? I mean, this is cognitive ease. For example, it's behavioral psychology bias. The easier a time that we have making sense of something, the more valuable we tend to believe that it is, and the more trustworthy we believe that it is. This is why you bold certain lines in books, is because it makes those lines stand out and make them easier to read, which therefore makes them more trustworthy. It happens when you see something more often. It happens the easier a time that we have cognitively processing that thing. And then the final one is community, right? Do we share communities' interests with somebody else? And so how did I pick my financial advisor, bringing that full circle? Well, my financial advisor sat on the board of the synagogue with my father, a synagogue that I have not attended for more than 20 years. My father sat on the board with him, and when my dad's financial advisor retired, he gave Ted a little bit of money to test him out, right? Ted did a good job, right? If he wasn't good at what he did, he wouldn't have kept the business, but he did a good job. He kept the business. When I needed somebody, my dad referred me him. I never looked at what credentials a financial advisor should have. I don't know whether he's ever created any media anywhere. I never spoke to anybody else who he's ever worked with. It was a comically ignorant and irresponsible decision to hire him, but also a very human way to hire somebody and buy something. And so this is how the business of the world goes around, isn't it? This is how the business of the world has always gone
example.
around.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect example of how people like this actually get hired. So I think you've convinced me, like as I look back at the last several years of what I've been doing with intentional wisdom, like I think it's like set a good base, and it's been good for me because like the whole idea of like, retaining what you teach, like I just diving into 10 podcasts on Zone 2 and then writing about that, then that sticks, right? That sticks.
Yeah.
But I haven't had a real strategy for turning it into a business. And your work is kind of convincing me to kind of flip it on its head and be like, you can still do the content stuff over here. Sure. And the content may be additive and it may be interesting. Like you may want to, let's say you're able to get a coaching client or two over on this side. Like it may still make sense to create the content over here, A, because you enjoy it and it's how you learn, but B, it's something that you can use with the client, right? And obviously it's kind of potentially a virtuous cycle.
You wouldn't do it in your spare time on top of your 3 kids and fatherhood and all the other stuff you like to do and your full-time job if this wasn't something that is so deeply ingrained in you and that you're obsessive about. So hell yeah, keep doing it. But when it comes to your podcast and when it comes to your brand, I think you hit the nail on the head. Nobody is ever going to see the name Intentional Wisdom and be like, oh my God, I have to listen to this. It's just not going to happen. I mean, there are other people, you think of like Farnham Street, for example, is with
Shane Parrish.
With Shane is, comes to mind. There are other people who have been doing that on a bigger scale.
Oh yeah.
For a very, very long time. And so there's not room for a lot of people. There's also modern wisdom, there's just like,
of course,
there's not room for
it's
a lot very
of people
crowded doing
space.
this. And all of those people have kind of by definition, like interview podcasts where it's always going to come down to the quality of the guest. There's only so many quality guests that exist. They're going to be on a bunch of different places. It's kind of a race to higher production values and stuff. It's just a really difficult game. And so, but I think a good parallel, perhaps, Greg, have you seen David Perell's stuff, How I Write?
Yeah.
That's the first thing that came to mind. You know what fascinates me about wealth management, about investment advisors? The same thing that fascinates me about the game of poker and poker players is decision-making. Decision-making. I think that the ability to make good decisions, and when you recognize a good opportunity, go all in on that opportunity very quickly, very aggressively, perhaps even without doing your due diligence, knowing when. Everybody's like, oh, speed. It's like, yeah, but not if it's a dumb fuck opportunity. So you have to very quickly build this ability to recognize these asymmetric opportunities and then move forward with speed. Well, these CEOs of these wealth management firms have been building this muscle and they want to talk about it. And they never get a chance to talk about it. And they certainly never get an opportunity to build prestige and reputation and status amongst their colleagues in that field. You think about like the famous Howard Marks memos. But there's not a lot of people that really have written openly or have been discovered. All of these other wealth management CEOs are like beating their chest in their own way. And they're like, please notice me. I mean, this is Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People 101. Imagine that every single person you meet, irrelevant of who they are, irrelevant of how much money or how important you think that they are, has a sign on their forehead that says, please, please, please make me feel important today. Please recognize me. And so, I don't know what it is for you, but I wrote down a few things here, like, perhaps how to make a lot of money, probably not, but like how I decide. You do a podcast, how I decide. How I make decisions. And you just become obsessed with that as a way to get access to these people, because you can't just go to these, the same as like what David Perell's done. David Perell couldn't get the type of guests that he's gotten on that podcast, How I Write, by just saying, hey, I'm doing a podcast about like how to be a good CEO. He's not going to get Sam Altman going on. And what he's doing is, the best CEOs are often very good writers and communicators. They never get a chance to talk about it. Everybody wants to talk about ChatGPT and OpenAI with Sam Altman. Sam Altman's like, actually, I love writing.
He's like, actually, I carry around this pad of paper and just, it's super interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And so, could you be that guy with how I decide? And then, by the way, the service that you offer just so happens to be, hey, my name's Greg Campion. I'm your guy for that.
Yeah,
literally the guy for that.com amongst and you just say, you're like, I only work with 5 CEOs at a time.
Yeah.
I charge $20,000 for a 3-month commitment.
Yep.
And
I love it.
That's it.
Let me ask you this. I know we got to finish up here, but let me ask you this. Like, if in terms of marketing something as being like super high end or exclusive, what do you think about almost going full reverse psychology mode? And like, let's say I had a landing page that was like, here are the reasons not to work with me. It's expensive. The results are not guaranteed. It may be uncomfortable with you, or it may be uncomfortable for you. I have extremely limited availability. If you still want to work with me, you can contact me here. Like, is that totally crazy?
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if you were trying to sell $27 ebooks and then upsell those people into a $500 group coaching program,
you think that's just like a little too cute or whatever for this audience?
You pull that cutesy kind of everybody knows it's bullshit, like gray area type. You'd pull that. These are highly intelligent people. These are people who you don't waste their time. These are people who it's only going to happen if they hear about you from their other rich buddy who they're complaining about, and they say, "Yo, I actually got a guy for that."
Right.
You're not going to do sales calls,
Exactly.
You're gonna.
I think it's about identifying like a pain point and like working with like one person, and that one person it works really well, and they're like, actually, there's this other guy who I play golf with that you should work with.
I mean, these people are so highly connected.
Yeah.
They're so highly connected, and they all, I mean, aside from, the main topic of conversation is always how to pay less tax, because that's basically what all rich people are interested in for stupid reasons. But the other thing that they all talk about are trying to figure out a way in a world where they can't really impress one another with their money of how to like show that they've discovered something unknown or, it's all status game. And so like, hey, I got a guy. That's a big status play. That's a big status play. And so I think you start with, it sounds like you have some good relationships with people. Call them up and just be like, hey, I've got an idea for a service that I think could be really, really useful for just a few at a time high power CEOs. Like, I want to be your guy who obsesses over the things you don't have time to obsess about, who books you in for the consults about the deeper family issues, who acts as the liaison between the health stuff that you want to do but don't have time to figure out the right person for. I want to be that person. Can I ask you about some of the things that you think about that you don't get a chance to talk about, just to learn more about you first? And then you get on the call with them, they're telling you about it, and you're like, hey, I have a crazy idea. You got 2 minutes for me to tell you about it? How about I become your guy? I'd love to test this out. I can do all these things for you.
And even if it's not that person, it's like they're giving you the pain points that you need to turn into the business. All right. I know you have a busy day today. You got a lot of stuff going on. I just want to say to our listeners and our viewers, like, you were kind enough to indulge me in this conversation about my own business and all that. But I want to say that like everything that's in your book, The Obvious Choice, is like the experience I had when reading the book was my own stuff was just kind of like unfolding before me. And I was like, I hadn't thought about my own business this way. Like, that's a super interesting angle. So I just want to give it a plug there, because especially like around the new year, people are like taking stock, thinking about what they want to do going forward. Like, it really kind of spurred a lot of ideas for me. So just really want to flag that. Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I honestly could ask you, like, I have like 5 pages of notes and we got to like a half page. So like, I think I could ask you questions all day, but again, I know you got a lot going on. Where should people, besides going and buying The Obvious Choice?
Yeah. Go buy the book.
Go buy the book. Yep.
It's called The Obvious Choice. It's HarperCollins. It's anywhere you get books, you can find it. It's in Kindle, It's in Audible, it's in hardcover. So whatever you however you like to consume books, buy the book. Like, don't even think about it. And then here's the deal that I'll make with you, is the same deal that I made with you, Greg, is if you don't absolutely love the book, like I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm at It's Coach Goodman. Send me a message and I'll send you back 100% of your money. So
love it.
You have no reason not to check it out. And I hope you love it.
All right, good stuff. We'll link to all your socials as usual, but everyone go find The Obvious Choice by Jonathan Goodman. Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate it, man. This is awesome.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you, man.
All right, my friend. There you go. Jonathan Goodman. Great guy. And the whole wintering in Mexico thing, I have to admit, I'm a little bit jealous of. That guy's got some stuff figured out, so good for him. Listen, go check out his book, as we talked about, and follow him on the socials, as the kids say. Links to everything in the show notes. And don't forget, 2 more things. Please rate, review, and tell a friend about this podcast. I would really appreciate that personally if you consider doing that. And 2, head over to gregcampion.substack.com to subscribe to my now weekly newsletter, Intentional Wisdom, where I recap conversations like this and share everything I'm learning on health and wellness, productivity, leadership, all that good stuff. Straight to your inbox once a week. Love to have you join that community. That's it for today, my friend. Thank you as always for listening, and I will see you next time.